I want to talk to you today about the Monty Python fallacy or the detached fallacy. So for those of you who are familiar with the movie Monty Python and the Holy Grail, there is a scene where Arthur is trailing through the woods and he's on his quest and he runs across the Black Knight that tells him none shall pass. And after a bit of an exchange, they end up in physical combat, and Arthur chops the Black Knight's arm off, and then he chops his other arm off, and then he chops his leg off, and then he chops his last leg off. And the guy just was not willing to concede, but here he is flopping around on the ground, kind of bouncing around like a little blob, and he's been totally delimbed. And I think this is a perfect example of the detached fallacy, of those that don't think that logic is really grounded in anything. And so I want us to walk through what the detached fallacy is in this sense. So it's an absolute assumption that logic stands on its own two legs. Now, if logic does stand on its own two legs, if it is part of objective reality and it's not physical, then you're kind of getting into God creating stuff and there being a backdrop to this reality that is spiritually substantive, that makes dualism look, like really possible. And, so we really don't want to go down that route. So in debating with Christians, atheists, agnostics, and skeptics don't want to make the mistake of assuming that there is real, objective, logical truth, like this absolute framework of logic. That's too Christian in thought. And so to actually believe this is intellectually irresponsible. It's just kind of irresponsible. And so we need to qualify, like what is logic? Is it truth? No, we're going to stay away from that. We've got to stay away from logic being truth or true. We kind of get away from that because those implications are way too close to the scriptures. And so let's see if we can qualify what logic is, just kind of give it a ballpark address here. So would it be too far off course to state that logic is scientific process, or the scientific process of refined thinking? Could we go with that? The scientific process of refined thinking. Like, we have to say it's a process because it's, it's developing. And we want to be as scientific and, constrained and like willing to take new data and be recalibrated or reorganized if it's off track. And we want to get to the meat and potatoes of not objective reality. Are we looking for objective reality? Yeah. So let's back off that for a second and qualify logic in even better terms. Let's say it's the human scientific process of refined thinking. I mean, isn't that what we're claiming? Is that, we're searchers of truth. We're seeking out the truth. And I don't think you've got the angle right, so I'm going to add this angle and we'll refine each other's logic in a sense. But according to the atheistic, agnostic, skeptical mindset, and we all got here by, evolution or maybe some other process, but we didn't have logic originally, so we do now. So that means it had a beginning point. It had a beginning point. And this kind of gets us tangled up like in the whole math dynamic. Do we discover it or did we create it? Is it there to be discovered? Well, that, we've got to kind of stay away from that because, again, that points too much towards Christianity. So we want to stay away from it and call the process of refining logic a human construct. I mean, we're like so intelligent as creatures, we're so smart. And so we're refining it again and again. And so then it gets down to something about the creation of logic that we need to comprehend is it had a beginning, a starting point, but it's also a democratic process. You might not like that, but this is true. It is a democratic process because you have to have another person to agree with your thought or your logic or your presentation of truth for it to gain any sort of traction. You have to have some kind of agreement, like with the law of non-contradiction. Other people have to agree with that. You don't just get to present a law and it becomes law because then you would be in control. So we've got to have democratic consensus. And with democratic consensus, then there's, this is getting crazy. This is getting tangled. But with democratic consensus, then there becomes the minority. And what if the minority thinks better than the majority? And what if they can't get them steered properly in thinking? So there's some problems there that I don't even have completely fleshed out. Maybe you can see this as a thought experiment and dive into it some yourself. But we got to understand, according to agnosticism, just as a general term, that logic had a beginning. It's a process we created, and you need to understand it's democratic. Like, other people have to agree that, yeah, that's the way thinking works. So, if logic is a democratic process, then it also seems like logic can also be immoral. What is the boundary? What ties logic to having to be moral? So back to our scenario, let's say most people agree this is the way to think about this. Most people agree this is what reality is. This is the way to think about it. And let's say the few, the minority that don't have the sway enough to get their thoughts presented as logical, then that minority, maybe they get crushed and maybe they are in what's right and true because somehow or another, morality seems to be a part of our, culture. I ask people all the time, like, how did you get this? And like, oh, it's just cultural. I'm like, on what foundation other than emotions? But they never tell me. But anyhow, since logic is democratic and it's created and it's our refining of what we want to agree on, then it could also, talking about as a possibility, be immoral. Well, since we created, according to agnosticism and skepticism and atheism, since we created morality as well, don't we have the freedom then to change logic and morality as we so choose? And that's what some people are absolutely advocating for. Like, let's change our modern understanding of morality to be more modern. We want to jettison the old ancient beliefs about morality, and let's get into some like new, solid, deep morality, and let's change it. Let's change our logic to fit the morality. Well, this is where things get really odd. Like, it's really odd. So the atheist who kind of claims that we create the rules and boundary of logic. It's a democratic process, and if it's a process, is it also a discovery process, which we'll get into in a second? But if we created the rules of logic, is logic done yet? Have we created all the rules of logic yet? Are there more rules of logic to discover? I mean, who knows? I mean, maybe tomorrow we decide there is. Maybe one intellectual can come up with a new concept and we all adapt to it like we've been doing. And so it's a process and it's ongoing. And what's really crazy about this is that such a dynamic process that when someone is outside of the microcosm of logic and presents thought, that atheists really hate it when we go outside of their parameters of what logic is. And you're into a logical fallacy. Immediately, if you go outside of the rules of logic, even though it's democratic and ongoing and it's a refining process, and etc., as soon as you step outside of the rules of logic to begin to think about the implications on the inside of the rules of logic, especially considering they're not all done yet, and we get to, subjectively evaluate these things, and maybe we get to sway the mass and think, oh, atheists can't stand that. And they get very authoritarian about it. That's really interesting. We don't believe, I'm speaking for atheists for a second, we don't believe in absolute truth. We don't believe in absolute objective morality. There's just matter and materialism around us. There's no spiritual realm that's a foundation for everything. I mean, that's retarded. So, you got to follow our rules of logic. Well, are they all done yet? No, I don't know. But they get very authoritarian. It's like, you're wrong. And then they begin to this is what truth is. Within these boundaries and parameters. See what I'm saying about authoritarian and dictatorial? It almost seems like anti-thinking. It's like, we don't allow more thinking. It's all got to be in these constraints because we've come up with these constraints, even though we came up with these constraints. I do think that the bulk of logical thoughts are really good at understanding things. But it is the detached fallacy or the Monty Python fallacy to think that logic covers all thought and all thinking precisely because we've got a few rules now under our belts. That doesn't grasp even the reality that we live in. So it's detached thinking to just think this is absolute. For someone to think that logic is truth without considering that it has a starting point, a process, that supposedly we created it, and that it's incomplete, then somebody would be guilty of the Monty Python fallacy. Like, logic makes it true and right, even though they haven't considered how we got logic or what we think about logic. And actually, this is just a glorified and expanded extension to the horseshoes and hand grenades fallacy. If something's close enough, if I think this thought matches that assessment close enough, and if it's close enough in my mind, then this is truth. That's the horseshoes and hand grenade fallacy. That's just this is an extension of that. Whereas you can misuse one fallacy, people can misuse logic. Like, logic is helpful, but if somebody thinks that's the total grasp of everything, that's a fallacy in and of itself. So, in reality, logic is partially built on the truth. It is. There are some things about logic that is true, but it's just not. It just doesn't reach far enough. So if someone thinks that to subjugate another person's thought by their own subjective understanding of what logic is fallacious in and of itself. So backing off all of this, is it not just simpler to go, hey, there is truth, we can know truth, we can discover truth, it's there, and then we have to surrender to it rather than trying to build our own frameworks that don't even hold up under the slightest bit of pressure?